John Dutton's Yellowstone funeral references its first big death. The Yellowstone Season 5 finale references the first significant Dutton death in the original series, bringing Taylor Sheridan's neo-Western full circle. The finale is an important outing for Beth and Case, who wrap up their affairs respectively. Case sells the Yellowstone Dutton Ranch to Thomas Rainwater and the Broken Rock tribe, shedding his family's burden by passing on the stewardship of the largest ranch in the country. Meanwhile, Beth finally ends her sibling rivalry with Jamie, killing her adopted brother and calling the police to report him for assault and involvement in their father's murder. John Aye's funeral is one of the most significant events, with his family and the Yellowstone cowboys gathering around to memorialize the Dutton patriarch and say goodbye. It is an emotional endeavor for Beth, who cares for her father perhaps more than anyone. As the characters stand in the grass, surrounded by gravestones that mark the Dutton family tree, John's funeral has significant ties to Yellowstone's first funeral, following Lee Dutton's Yellowstone death in the series premiere. The details highlight the importance of Costner's character in Yellowstone, standing as a reminder of his opening moments in the series. In the Yellowstone Season 5 finale, Case and Rip lead the funeral procession, carrying John Dutton's gleaming mahogany coffin down to the Dutton family graveyard. The episode then cuts to Lee Dutton's grave, which reads the years he lived, from 1974 to 2017. Showing Lee's gravestone is a touching tribute to John Aye's oldest son, who perished at the beginning of the modern range war for the ranch. The Duttons have experienced many hardships while struggling to maintain control of the land, and Lee's death marks one of the most significant sacrifices the family made to protect it. John Aye's funeral subtly references Lee's death in other ways, such as the sorrowful fiddle music and behavior of two key Yellowstone characters at each ceremony. As attendants gather around the coffin at Lee's funeral, John hesitates to proceed, and Beth similarly stalls at her father's, neither wanting to accept one of the greatest tragedies of each of their lives. During Lee's funeral, John Aye looks to the sky, then closes his eyes, momentarily transcending. Beth does the same at her father's funeral, staring into the tree brush, watching a hawk fly away as her more immediate surroundings dissolve. The death of John Dutton's eldest son in the Yellowstone series premiere kicked off the show. A modern range war began after a herd of cattle ended up on the Broken Rock Reservation, prompting John Aye to send a convoy in to retrieve his beef. Lee was a key figure in his father's attack, riding through the night on horseback. However, Broken Rock tribe members awaited the Yellowstone Ranch's maneuver, and its members and tribal police awaited them with firearms. After a series of events failed to go as planned, Lee is shot off his horse and killed by Robert Long. Lee Dutton's death was the first in a series of tragedies for the Duttons in Yellowstone as they fought to defend and maintain the biggest ranch in the country. Lee and John's deaths are bookends to the Yellowstone story, each a tragedy that came at the cost of protecting the Yellowstone Dutton Ranch during its modern era. As they occupied the land for 141 years, the entire Dutton family faced a series of tragedies, and many Duttons died. However, the youngest sixth-generation Dutton rancher, Case, ends his family's reign of the property, shedding the burden of protecting his family's estate. The Montana wind howled, bending the trees in the Dutton family cemetery like the twisted bones of the land itself. The harsh beauty of the rugged hills surrounding the Dutton ranch was in full view, but today they seemed distant, colder than usual, as if mourning the loss of something more than just a life. The funeral was a stark and somber affair, with the looming sky threatening to pour down the tears of the heavens themselves. John Dutton, patriarch of the Dutton family and steely owner of the Yellowstone Ranch, stood at the edge of his wife's gravesite, his face a mixture of hard resolve and deep sorrow. He had weathered many storms, but this was one that threatened to break him. The loss was one he had never fully prepared for, even if it had loomed over the family for years. As the wind whipped through his hair, his mind wandered back to the first great death that had set the stage for all that followed. The death that had been the catalyst for the Dutton family's dark, complicated history, leaving scars that would never heal. He thought of his brother, Peter, his first best friend, and his first great loss. Peter had been the one to stand by him when everything felt like it was falling apart, the one who had understood the weight of the land, and the bloodline that carried the Dutton name. A bond had existed between them that John had never felt with anyone else, not even his father. Peter was the only one who had ever truly shared his vision for the ranch, the fight to protect it, even when it meant pushing everyone else away. And in the end, it was his death that had irrevocably shaped John's destiny. The memory of that fateful day still hung heavy in John's mind. It was the day when he had learned that loyalty came at a cost that could tear families apart and turn friends into enemies. The betrayal was quiet at first, a subtle shift that John had ignored. But by the time he understood what had happened, it was too late. Peter's death had come at the hands of the very people they had once trusted, the ones they had fought alongside to defend the land. It had been a gunshot wound, a swift end to the life of someone who had once stood with him in the trenches. John had tried to put the pieces together, tried to make sense of it, but it was a puzzle that would never align. The death had been unnecessary, avoidable, yet it had come regardless. And with it, a part of John had died too. It was that death, that crushing loss, that had ignited a fire in John, a fire that burned through him, turning his soul to ash. It wasn't just the loss of his brother that had affected him so deeply. It was the realization that the land, the ranch, the very thing he had worked his entire life to protect, could be taken away in an instant. That the fight for the Yellowstone would never end, that it would be an eternal battle. Now here he stood at the funeral of his wife, with his children scattered across the land, carrying the weight of the past and the future. Beth, his fiery daughter, stood by his side, her eyes cold and unreadable as always. Rip Wheeler, his son-in-law, stood behind them, his silent strength a testament to the unspoken bond he had with the family. Case, his son, stood off to the side, his eyes on the ground, lost in his thoughts, while Jamie, his adopted son, hung back, watching everything from a distance, his face an unreadable mask. As the minister droned on, speaking of love, loss, and the cycles of life, John's mind wandered again. He thought about the people who had come and gone in his life, the ones who had played a part in shaping the man he had become. Some had died violently, some had faded away quietly, and some had left him by choice. But all had left their mark on him. The first big death, the one that had changed everything, was Peter's. It had been the spark that lit the fire, the one that had pushed him into the role of protector, the one that had shown him the true cost of loyalty. It had forced him to become something different, something darker, something more dangerous. And while he had never truly healed from it, he had learned to live with it. The pain was always there, but it had become part of him, part of the land, part of the Dutton legacy. The funeral was a symbol of that legacy, a grim reminder of the sacrifices the Duttons had made to keep the ranch alive, to preserve what was theirs. But it also marked the end of an era, the passing of the torch to the next generation. Beth, Rip, Case, and even Jamie, they would all have to carry the weight of the family's history, for better or for worse. As the ceremony came to a close, the mourners began to disperse, the sound of boots against the dirt echoing in the stillness. The wind had picked up, sending a chill through the air. John felt it deep in his bones, but he stood tall, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He knew the ranch would continue, that the fight for it would never end. But he also knew that the scars of the past, those deep, painful scars, would follow him, and his family forever. The first big death had set the stage for everything that had come after. It had shaped John into the man he was today, a man who would do whatever it took to protect his family, his land, and his legacy. And as he turned to walk away from the gray site, he knew that no matter how much he tried to bury the past, it would always be there, lurking in the shadows, a reminder of the cost of the fight for Yellowstone.